He expected a plain bride. But her beauty stunned the Wild West forever. The Wyoming sun scorched the land, but Jacob Thornton's heart felt colder still. In his hand, a letter, a plea for a plain wife, nothing more. At Willow Creek Station, the town watched with sneers as he waited a man desperate enough to buy companionship. The train arrived, steam hissing, and then her, Emma Foster. Not plain, not ordinary. A beauty so striking, the crowd fell silent. Whispers cut through the dust. She must be running from something. But when Jacob reached for her trunk, their hands touched. And in that fleeting moment, his buried heart stirred again. He had asked for plain. Instead, fate had sent him the one thing he feared most, and the one thing he needed most. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you watching from today? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now, settle into a quiet place. Breathe deep and let the whispers of the Wild West carry you into tonight's tale. The Wyoming sun beat down without mercy, bleaching the land into brittle shades of gold and gray. Jacob Thornton stood on the sagging porch of his ranch house, a lone figure against an endless horizon. His fields had withered under months of drought. His cattle grew thin, and the silence around him pressed like a weight heavier than any storm. In his weathered hand, he held a letter crease-smudged read too many times. 6 weeks earlier, he had sent his words east, not for love, but for survival. He had asked the agency for a plain wife, a woman steady enough to share burdens, not stir the ghosts of his heart. Today, that answer was coming on the noon train. Jacob adjusted the collar of the white shirt he hadn't worn since his wife Martha's funeral. The fabric felt stiff foreign, a reminder of the man he used to be. As he hitched his wagon, the prairie wind carried only dust and silence. Yet beneath his stoic jaw, a flicker of unease betrayed him. He had prayed for plain, for ordinary, but what if fate had prepared something else? And with that thought, Jacob set his eyes toward Willow Creek, unaware that the woman stepping off that train would shatter his solitude forever. Part 1. The woman steps off the train. The train whistle shattered the sweltering noon of Willow Creek, sending a curl of black smoke into the sky. The whole town had heard that the reclusive cowboy, Jacob Thornton, was meeting his new wife, and so the platform was busier than usual. Some stood with arms crossed waiting for entertainment. Others whispered behind lace fans. In the thick air of red dust and curiosity, Jacob stepped down from his wagon hat, pulled low to hide the tension in his eyes. He was not accustomed to such scrutiny, yet today every step seemed heavier beneath the weight of dozens of watchful eyes. The grinding of iron wheels against the track rattled the ground. The train slowed, then halted with a long hiss. Jacob swallowed hard, his hand tightening around the brim of his hat. In his mind, he pictured a simple woman, a kind round face, roughened features, hands that knew hard work. That was all he asked for, companionship, nothing more, nothing less. The carriage door swung open. At first, only a few passengers descended, a weary family, a stooped old man, a vendor burdened with bags. The crowd began to shift with impatience. A few smirked knowingly. Then in a sudden hush, the figure of a woman appeared in the doorway. A gloved hand rested lightly on the rail. Sunlight caught her golden hair gleaming like ripened wheat. She wore a plain brown dress unadorned, yet her proud bearing and steady gaze silenced the platform. Her face was refined, her honey-colored eyes burning bright through the haze of dust. Jacob froze. He had prayed for an ordinary wife for a home that stirred no storms. But this woman, Emma Foster, arrived like a reckoning. The whispers died only to rise again sharper now. Good Lord, it can't be her. Too beautiful. By half she must be running from something. Emma descended the steps slowly, her eyes sweeping over the crowd until they found Jacob. In that instant, his chest clenched as though an invisible hand gripped it tight. He longed to turn away, to reject this beauty that reopened wounds buried for 3 long years. Yet in that same breath, he knew fate had shifted, and his solitary life would never be the same again. Part 2. The Lonely Ranch. The road from the station to the ranch stretched 15 miles, red dust rising behind every turn of the wheels. On the rickety wagon, Jacob held the reins, eyes fixed straight ahead, lips pressed tight. Beside him, Emma sat upright, hands clasped neatly on her lap. They rode in silence, broken only by the steady beat of hooves and the dry wind whistling across the barren plains. Jacob felt the distance between them was longer than the road itself. He dared not meet Emma's gaze, afraid that her eyes would shatter the hard shell he had built around himself. Inside, he repeated the same refrain, "I need a practical woman, not a beautiful, fragile breeze." And yet, the memory of her golden hair shining in the sun would not leave him. When the wagon stopped before the weathered gray house, Emma lifted her head to take it in. The roof sagged on one corner, the barn bore patched boards, the porch leaned crookedly. The garden was parched. The earth split into long cracks. Jacob climbed down, lifted Emma's trunk, without looking at her, and muttered in a hoarse voice, "It isn't much, but it's shelter." Emma followed, composed and calm. Inside the narrow room, held only a worn single bed and a dusty window. She set her gloves upon the mattress, her eyes quietly sweeping over the space. No complaint left her lips, not even a frown. Only silence so steady that Jacob felt both startled and uneasy. By evening, the sunset stained the sky a deep red. Jacob worked the pump at the well, the handle creaking with every pull. Emma stepped outside, pausing by the chicken coop, her gaze observant. She asked, "How many eggs do you get each day?" Jacob hesitated, then answered curtly, "Not many." She crouched, scooping a handful of dry soil, letting the brittle grains slip between her fingers. Her voice was a whisper, almost to herself. "The land isn't dead, only thirsty." Jacob looked at her, unsettled. Where he saw despair, she found a glimmer of hope. Yet instead of speaking, he turned away, retreating behind his wall of silence. That night's supper was nothing more than dry bread and thin soup. Emma tidied the dishes with quiet precision, every movement neat, free of complaint. Jacob sat at the table, mending a torn rein, his eyes drifting to her again and again in the lamplight. Each glance struck him with the quiet tenderness she carried so effortlessly. Strangeness still filled the house, 2 people, 2 silences like walls facing each other. But beneath the taut stillness, an invisible thread was beginning to weave between them, fragile, undeniable. Part 3. The Quiet Flame. The evening wind howled through the loose boards of the wooden house, leaving behind a mournful sound like the sigh of the parched land. In the small kitchen, A dim oil lamp flickered over a scarred wooden table where Jacob Thornton sat bent, mending a frayed rein. Emma Foster, having washed her hands, began to prepare supper. There was little to work with a handful of flour, some dry beans, a scrap of old lard left from the week before. Yet she showed no hesitation. With steady composure, Emma lit the stove, set a pot above the fire, and began to stir. The smell of flour and beans slowly filled the room, mingling with the sting of oil smoke. Jacob, long accustomed to cold suppers of dry bread, lifted his head without meaning to. In the warm glow of the fire, he watched the unfamiliar woman move with a rhythm both firm and graceful. No complaints, no sighs, only patience. It startled him more than anything else. Emma turned, taking up a wooden ladle, her hands slender yet strong. Jacob noticed the calluses on her wrists, the marks of labor, not the softness of a pampered lady. He frowned, slightly, uncertain, even impressed. A question echoed inside him. What has she endured to learn such patience? When the meal was ready, Emma set the table with care. The torn cloth was folded neatly, dishes placed in order. She invited Jacob to sit, her voice quiet but steady. Eat, Mr. Thornton. Jacob nodded, lowering himself into the chair. He lifted a spoonful of hot bean soup. The taste was plain, even thin, yet it carried a warmth he had not felt in years. The room, once hollow with emptiness, now held the scent of food, the sound of a spoon against a bowl, the presence of a woman moving about. A small spark of life had returned. They ate in silence, broken only by the occasional wail of wind outside, reminding them that the land was still merciless. Emma lifted her gaze to the window and said softly, I once knew kitchens filled with laughter. Now just a roof and a bowl of soup are enough for me. Jacob paused. He wanted to ask more, but hesitation closed his throat. He knew she carried shadows of her own, and perhaps it was not time to stir them. Yet her words struck something deep in him, summoning the memory of Martha, when this house too had laughter and the scent of fresh bread. Grief rose sharp, but with it a faint warmth crept into the hollow space inside him. After supper, Emma gathered the dishes. Jacob stepped forward to help, but she shook her head, eyes firm. I can manage. I've cared for a household since I was a child. There's nothing here that frightens me. Jacob stood still, watching her hands move swiftly as she washed each bowl with the little water they had. Not fragile, not dependent, Emma proved in action she was no delicate flower. Admiration mingled with unease in his chest. He realized her presence had already changed the weary rhythm of this house. Night fell, and the wind grew fiercer, rattling the windows. Emma fed the fire, its golden light flickering warmly across the walls. Jacob set aside his mending, his calloused hands idle, as he watched the flame dance in Emma's eyes. A quiet fire burned there, gentle, steady, and strangely, it stirred something in him too. A small hope, a life he thought had died with his first wife. Jacob cleared his throat, his voice rough like sand in his chest. You're nothing like I expected. Emma lifted her gaze, frank, but not sharp. None of us are what others expect. The simplicity of her answer stunned him. He said nothing, but her words lingered like a cool breeze sweeping across cracked earth. As the fire dwindled, Jacob rose and slowly laid more logs on the hearth. He glanced once more at Emma, sitting by the window, mending a torn hem. Each stitch was steady, neither rushed nor trembling. A simple sight, yet, in its simplicity, there was strength enough to make him turn away afraid of what might show in his eyes. Outside, the plains were still dry, the sky still veiled in dust. But inside the small kitchen, the fire burned, and with it, another fire, quiet and enduring, had been kindled in two lonely hearts. Part 4. Wolves and the gun night settled over the ranch. The sky streaked with gray clouds drifting past a thin sliver of moon. The wind gusted, rattling the old tin roof. In the barn, the livestock grew restless, the low moan of cattle, the shuffle of hooves across the dry ground. Jacob was mending a rein when he heard it, a sound all too familiar, but sharper now, more chilling. A long howl echoing across the empty prairie. He set the needle down, holding his breath. Wolves. And tonight, they were closer. Jacob rose, reaching for the rifle hanging on the wall. But as he stepped onto the porch, he stopped short. Emma was already there, draped in a thin shawl, her eyes fixed on the vast darkness. She sat with a rifle across her lap. Its wooden stock was worn but polished, as though well cared for. Jacob frowned, his voice low and rough. "What are you doing out here?" Emma did not turn her gaze steady on the open field. "Keeping watch. My father taught me. When there's something worth protecting, a woman must know how to use a gun." Before he could answer, another howl broke through the night, closer, fiercer. Shadows stirred at the edge of the field, pairs of yellow eyes glinting in the moonlight. Jacob strode forward, but Emma had already raised the rifle to her shoulder, her movement swift, astonishingly calm. Her hands did not shake, her eyes did not blink. A wolf lunged from the brush fangs flashing. In that instant, the rifle cracked its thunder rolling across the prairie. The beast fell in the dust, lifeless. The pack howled in fury, circling, but as Jacob fired his own shots into the dark, their cries faded. Within minutes, silence returned, broken only by the sighing wind. Jacob lowered his gun and turned to Emma. She remained seated, her expression steady, her hand brushing the stock, as though to steady herself. The lantern flame flickered across her face, sharpening the resolve in her features, stronger than any woman he had ever known. He stepped closer. His voice softened. "You shoot well. Who taught you?" Emma met his eyes where moonlight mingled with memory. "My father." He said, "If the world sees women as nothing but possessions, then at the very least, we must know how to protect our own lives." Jacob fell silent. Her words cut into him like a blade, part admiration, part sorrow. He had prayed for an ordinary wife, plain enough to bring no trouble, gentle enough to stir no ghosts. Yet here before him was someone entirely different, beautiful, fierce, and resilient enough to survive this unforgiving land. The wind swept through again, lifting the dust into the night. But in that darkness, Jacob recognized a truth. Emma Foster was not merely a companion. She was a force he had never dared to admit he needed. And from that moment in the way, his eyes rested on her. Something new began to kindle, not just duty, but deep respect, and a flame impossible to extinguish. Part 5. Water from the earth. The sun climbed high, its burning light scorching the prairie. Around the ranch, the land lay cracked and broken, deep lines twisting across the ground like a map of old wounds. Jacob had grown used to this sight over many months, and inside him there was only resignation. But Emma, with her hard eyes and calloused hands, refused to remain silent before the land's slow death. She pointed toward the cluster of cottonwoods at the far edge of the field, their leaves greener than the others, whispering in the wind. Her voice was certain. If they're still alive, there must be water beneath them. Jacob gave a dry, weary laugh. I've searched this land for years. There's nothing left. Emma said nothing. She took up a shovel, her small but steady hands breaking into the earth. The soil was hard, the blade bouncing back, but she did not stop. Jacob folded his arms, watching, ready to turn away. At last, with a sigh, he picked up a pickaxe and joined her. All morning they dug. Sweat soaked their shirts, dust caked their faces. Jacob's palms blistered. Emma's hands bled, yet she kept on. Each heavy strike rang like a defiance hurled against the sky. By noon, Jacob dropped his tool breath. Ragged. It's useless. This land is dead. Emma lifted her face, flushed sweat running in streams. Her honey eyes blazed. The land isn't dead. It's only thirsty. If we give up, we'll be letting it bury us along with it. Her words pierced Jacob like an arrow. He looked at her, and for the first time in years, glimpsed pride and strength he had long forgotten in himself. That afternoon, they pressed on. The soil darkened, grew damp. Jacob dug harder now, as though Emma's will had poured into him. And then, as the sun tipped west, a sound rang out the shovel, sinking with a wet squelch. Jacob froze. Another strike and another. The earth deepened in color, and then clear drops of water seeped into the cracks. Emma fell to her knees, hands trembling, as she scooped away clumps of dirt. Water trickled, gathering into a thin stream, glimmering beneath the red light of dusk. She smiled the first smile Jacob had ever seen from her. Though streaked with mud, it shone like a miracle. Jacob sank beside her, breathless. He watched the water rise, his eyes blurring. For a moment, it was as if the barrenness inside him too had been watered. He whispered, "I can't believe it." Emma turned to him, her voice low but steady. "Sometimes you just have to listen to the land. It doesn't betray us. It only waits for someone patient enough." They sat side by side, covered in dirt and sweat, yet their hearts throbbed as though they had won back a piece of life itself. Jacob realized then that in Emma's unyielding persistence, there burned a force he had forgotten, not a miracle from heaven, but the strength of human will, of faith. When night fell, they returned to the wooden house. Behind them, the fresh-dug well still wept water, reflecting the thin crescent moon. Jacob glanced back, a strange rush rising within him. Gratitude, awe, and a trembling awareness of the strength of the woman beside him. He had once thought her a burden, but now Jacob understood she was the one saving him, and this land he had believed lost. And from that moment on, a new fear stirred in him, fear that one day he might not be able to live without her. Part 6. The Rain and the Confession. For a week the sky had been bare, the earth cracked, the grass withered as if dead. But that afternoon, while Jacob was gathering wood in the yard, the wind shifted. The air grew heavy, carrying the dry, waiting scent of soil. He looked up, and for the first time in months, heavy gray clouds rolled across the sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance, lightning split the darkening heavens, and then rain fell. Not the stray drops they had grown used to, but true rain streams of water pounding the roof, drumming against the thirsty ground. Jacob stood frozen, his arms at his sides, letting the cool drops wash over him. The smell of wet earth rose up, a scent of rebirth he thought he would never know again. From the house, Emma rushed to the porch, tilting her face skyward. Then, casting off all restraint, she stepped out into the storm. She spun in the downpour, her dress clinging to her frame, her golden hair plastered, yet shining with each flash of lightning. She laughed a bright, clear laugh that mingled with the rain like a hymn of release. Jacob called out, alarmed, "Emma, get inside. It's too strong." But she shook her head, her eyes alight. "No, Jacob. I want to remember this. For the first time in years, I feel free." He strode down the steps, pulling her back beneath the porch as thunder cracked overhead, both dripping breathless. Jacob's hands trembled as he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. In that moment, when her eyes lifted to his, it was as if a current surged between them, erasing the fragile space that had kept them apart. Emma spoke softly, her voice carried by the storm. "I must tell you the truth. Why I came here." Jacob stayed silent, his gaze steady, urging, yet worried. She clutched the blanket tight, drew a long breath, and forced the words out. "My father owed a debt to a wealthy man, Charles Whitman. He lent money, then demanded me in payment, as though I were property. The night before the wedding, I overheard him laughing with his friends, saying I was nothing but a debt repaid, a thing he had bought with coin." Her voice shook, but her eyes remained firm. "I couldn't endure it. I ran searching for a way out. When I read your letter, I knew it was my only chance to escape those chains." Jacob's fists tightened, his jaw clenched. The image of the woman who had dug a well, who had stood her ground against wolves, now overlaid with the truth of being treated as an object. Rage surged in him, not only at Whitman, but at a world that had driven Emma to flee. He said hoarsely, "Emma, you are no man's possession anymore." Her eyes brimmed rain and tears indistinguishable. She whispered, trembling, "I'm afraid, Jacob. Afraid he will come for me. Afraid you'll regret choosing me." Jacob held her gaze, his rough hand firm on her shoulder, his voice resolute. "I have no regret. And if he comes, he'll have to face me first." In that moment, the rain seemed to soften. In the small wooden house with the fire crackling inside and the storm raging beyond, two souls scarred by different wounds found common ground. The yearning to be seen as human, not possession, not castaway. Jacob had once thought he wanted an ordinary wife to share his burdens. But as Emma sat before him, fragile yet fierce, wounded yet proud, he understood the truth. She was the miracle, the flame that had awakened his heart from years of silence. Part 7. The Claimant. That morning, the sky hung gray, heavy with omen. Jacob was fastening the chicken coop door when the thunder of hooves broke across the road. Not the weary gait of ranch horses, but sharp, proud, defiant. He lifted his head, his eyes narrowing at once. A great black stallion thundered into view, a plume of red dust rising in its wake. Atop the saddle sat a man in a fine suit, his long coat snapping in the wind. His hair was slicked, his face severe, and his steel-gray eyes glinted with arrogance. He halted at the fence, sitting tall, like a master surveying his domain. "You must be Thornton, then." His voice rang out, deep and scornful. Jacob set down the hammer and strode into the yard. He did not need to ask. This was Charles Whitman. The door to the house creaked open, and Emma appeared with a water pail. At the sight of the man, she froze. Her face drained, her hands trembled, the pail slipped spilling water across the dry ground. "Hello, Emma." Whitman's smile was cold as he puffed a cigar, releasing smoke into the air. "You've given me trouble, but at last I've found you. You have no right." Emma tried to steady her voice, but it quivered. Slowly, Whitman drew a folded paper from his vest. He raised it high, his tone triumphant. "Here it is. Your father's signature. $20,000 of debt forgiven in exchange for you. By law, you belong to me." Jacob stepped forward, placing himself between them, his eyes hard as steel. "She is my wife. Here no one belongs to you." Whitman narrowed his eyes, then burst into a mocking laugh. "Wife, I checked. No certificate, no preacher, no witness. Just two sinners playing house. Do you really think men like you can defy law and money?" Jacob's fists clenched, heat surging in his blood, yet he held himself steady, refusing blind fury. Behind him, he heard Emma's ragged breath, felt her fear. He knew this was the shadow she had spoken of on that stormy night. Whitman leaned down his gaze, cutting Emma like a blade, appraising her as one might livestock at an auction. His words fell sharp. "Pack your things, Emma. You're coming with me. It's my rightful claim." Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her voice, breaking yet resolute. "I'd rather die here than return to you." The words struck Jacob like fire to dry grass. He stepped forward, his voice booming like thunder. "Leave Whitman. Now." For a long moment, the two men stared, locked in silent battle. The air thickened, the wind stilled, even the insects fell quiet. Behind Jacob, Emma clutched her skirt, her heart pounding. Whitman sneered, his arrogance unshaken. "You'll regret this, Thornton. I will return, and next time, I'll bring the law to claim what's mine." He jerked the reins. The black stallion reared, screaming into the air, then wheeled away in a storm of dust. Jacob stood, unmoving, his shoulders rigid, his gaze dark. Behind him, Emma collapsed to her knees, her tears falling into the dirt. Jacob bent, lifting her gently. His voice was hoarse but firm. "He may have wealth, he may have law, but he will never have you. On this land, I swear, he will not touch you again." Part 8. The Duel of Honor. The next noon, all of Willow Creek seemed to hold its breath. The sun stood high, pouring blazing light onto the dusty main street. Windows along both sides were drawn halfway, hiding curious eyes behind them. People gathered along the wooden sidewalks in hushed clusters. News had spread like wildfire. Jacob Thornton had challenged Charles Whitman to a gunfight. In the center of the street, Sheriff Morrison held a white handkerchief, his face tight with strain. He knew Whitman's reputation, a man who had killed more than once in so-called fair duels. Jacob, though once a cavalryman, had lived in seclusion for years, his gun long unused. But the law of the West was clear. When honor was challenged, no man could walk away. Jacob emerged from the saloon, his white shirt buttoned to the collar hat brim pulled low over his solemn eyes. Dust clung to his old boots with every deliberate step. In his hand swung his familiar revolver, as much a part of him as his own bones. The steady calm of his gait hushed the crowd. Across the street, Whitman appeared, astride his black stallion, then dismounted with a flourish, brushing dust from his fine vest. His smile curled with disdain. "Thornton, you're brave, but I've already gunned down 7 men like you. You'll be the 8th." Jacob gave no reply. He only nodded to the sheriff and took his stand. From the crowd, Emma watched her hands clutching her dress tight, her eyes fixed on him, unblinking. Her heart pounded as though it would tear from her chest. Sheriff Morrison raised the handkerchief high. The town held its breath. Even the wind stilled. "When the cloth falls, you may draw his voice," rang hoarse but firm. The cloth floated in the air, time itself seeming to stop. Sunlight glared off steel. Whitman's hand flashed his gun, roaring first. The bullet tore Jacob's sleeve dust, erupting. But Jacob did not falter. His breath remained steady. He shifted half a step, his hand moving slow, yet certain. His revolver thundered. Whitman staggered his gun, dropping his body, collapsing onto the dirt. Blood bloomed across his fine coat. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some gasped in horror. Emma burst into tears, though her eyes shone with newfound faith. Jacob did not celebrate. He walked toward Whitman, revolver still in hand. The fallen man lifted his head, a crooked smile on his lips, voice breaking with pain. "Finish it, Thornton. Kill me." Jacob stopped a few steps away, his gun aimed true. One pull of the trigger would end it all. But his hand lowered. He holstered the weapon, his voice cutting through the street. "I don't need to kill to prove my honor. You'll live. But if you ever come near her again, I will not miss." His words rang like a verdict. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, nodding gravely. Around them, the whispers shifted. For the first time, the town no longer looked at Jacob with doubt, but with respect. Whitman, his face twisted with pain and humiliation, was dragged away by his men. The red dust closed behind him, but the weight of the duel lingered, the razor's edge between death and honor, between fear and faith. Emma pushed through the crowd, running to Jacob. She said nothing, only grasped his hand tightly. And in her eyes, Jacob saw it clear. Whatever storm still lay ahead from this day on, she had given him her trust completely. Part 9. A Cowboy's Life. A Cowboy's Honor. The smoke cleared, leaving the acrid sting of gunpowder hanging in the air. Willow Creek's main street still trembled from the echo of gunfire. Whitman lay sprawled in the dust, his shoulder drenched in blood, breath ragged, the arrogance on his face twisted into pain. The crowd, silenced as though their throats had been bound, now erupted into a storm of noise. Some cheered, voices breaking with relief, while others gaped in disbelief that a reclusive man like Jacob could bring down such a notorious gunman with lightning speed. But all knew one thing: Jacob Thornton had won. Jacob strode toward Whitman, his old boots striking the dry earth with heavy finality. The revolver gleamed cold in his hand. The crowd hushed again, sensing this was the moment of judgment. Whitman raised his head, his features contorted with agony, yet his eyes still blazing with defiance. He hissed, "Do it, Thornton. Kill me. Don't let me come back." Jacob stood over him. The gun leveled his finger, hovering on the trigger. The moment stretched endless. Memories surged: Martha's absence, the silence of the house, the endless thirst of the land, the weight of solitude. And now Emma, somewhere in the crowd, trembling yet watching with unwavering trust. One shot could end everything. But death was not justice. Jacob lowered the gun. His voice rang like steel. "I don't need to kill to prove my honor. You'll live. But you will leave Willow Creek today. And if you ever return, I swear I will not miss." The street exploded in murmurs, some breaking into applause, others shouting in support. Emma covered her face, tears spilling not from fear, but from relief, from pride. Yet Jacob was not done. He reached inside his shirt and drew out a folded paper. Raising it high, he declared to the crowd and to Whitman bleeding at his feet, "This is our marriage license. Reverend Collins signed it this very morning. Emma is my lawful wife before the law and before God." His words cracked through the air like thunder. Gasps swept the crowd. Those who had mocked Jacob for marrying a mail-order bride now bowed their heads in silence. Some women wept quietly, while the men nodded their gazes on Jacob, changed no longer, mocking but respectful. Whitman ground his teeth, his face pale. He knew the truth: this battle was lost. Not just blood spilled, but power stripped away his honor, shattered before the whole town. Two men hauled him upright, dragging him toward his horse. Hatred burned in his eyes. "This isn't over," he growled, before spurring his stallion into the horizon, a cloud of red dust swallowing him whole. Jacob turned his eyes, searching. Emma pushed through the crowd, running to him, her eyes wet yet shining. He took her hand, his rough palm closing over her trembling fingers. In that instant, beneath the harsh sun and the gaze of all Willow Creek, Jacob knew he had won more than honor. He had won a home, a future, and a love he had once thought forever beyond his reach. That noon, the main street of Willow Creek bore witness to more than a duel. It bore witness to the rebirth of a man. Jacob Thornton, once a recluse scorned by many, had become the cowboy who kept both his life and his honor, and above all, the rightful husband of Emma Foster. Part 10. A New Home. At last the harsh summer yielded. Since that fateful day on the main street of Willow Creek, the lives of Jacob Thornton and Emma Foster had changed, like parched land suddenly blessed with rain. The gunfight had ended not only with honor, but with a beginning. And that beginning was not marked by bullets or oaths, but by every swing of the hoe, every seed pressed into the earth. Morning sunlight spilled gently through the small window. Jacob rose early, his old boots thudding across the wooden floor. He still tended the cattle-mended fences, but he was no longer alone. Each time he turned back, he found Emma at the stove, golden hair gleaming in the haze of smoke hands kneading dough for fresh bread. The clink of spoons, the fragrance of baking filled the house, once empty and cold. The ranch stirred back to life. The new well gave sweet water. Year-round tender rows of vegetables sprouted where once the soil cracked. Emma tended each plant with care-weeding watering. Jacob, once resigned to despair, now worked beside her broad shoulders, shielding young shoots, calloused hands, treating them like treasures. One evening, Jacob leaned against the fence, gazing over the thriving garden. His voice was low, warm. "I never thought I'd see this land alive again." Emma smiled, her eyes glistening. "The land is like people, Jacob. It only needs a chance." Her words stitched together the fractures within him. For years, Jacob believed his life ended in solitude and memory. But Emma had proven that life could return where all seemed dead and love could take root in a closed heart. Even the people of Willow Creek had changed their view. Once they mocked the hermit who wed by mail. Now they came to his ranch with respect, offering seeds, lending livestock, helping mend barns. Emma always greeted them with warmth, serving tea, sharing laughter. Her voice rang on the porch, sending neighbors home with unexpected joy. One autumn evening, children ran past the ranch, pointing at the flowers blooming by the porch. A little girl cried out, Look, Mr. Thornton's house has flowers now. Standing beside Emma, Jacob felt his heart tighten. The house that once symbolized loss now became a place of hope. The man who had buried his heart for 3 long years now felt it bloom again, not in loud splendor, but in quiet peace. At night, autumn winds whispered across the plains. In the kitchen, a lamp glowed. Soup simmered. Jacob sat at the table while Emma sewed by the oil light. He lifted his eyes to her watching, then whispered, "Emma, I love you." She froze her hands still. Then gently, she laid the needle down and came to him, her eyes shining with tears, her smile tender. "And I love you, Jacob, my unexpected husband, the man I choose for all my days." Their hands clasped tight. Outside, the wind sighed through the grass, but in their home, their hearts beat as one. Time passed. Winter blanketed the ranch in white. The wooden house, once barren, now glowed with golden light. Curtains Emma had sewn fluttered at the window. In the hearth, firewood crackled. Jacob and Emma sat side by side, listening to the snow fall, their hearts wrapped in peace. Jacob whispered, voice rough, but full of feeling, "For 3 years, I thought I had nothing left to lose. But then you came, and I realized I had so much to lose: loneliness, fear, the walls I built. Losing them, I found what mattered most: you." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering back, "I thought I was running from a prison, but now I know I was running to a home." Outside, the prairie lay vast and white beneath winter's weight. Inside, a fire burned, warming their faces. And in that harsh land, a new home had truly taken root, not only with green shoots, fresh water, or the hearth's glow, but with love forged by hardship, steadied by courage, sustained by faith. Jacob once wished for an ordinary wife to share his burdens. Fate sent him someone else, beautiful, strong, unyielding. And it was no mistake. It was what he needed. Love did not come as expected, but as salvation. And from that day, the Willow Creek Ranch ceased to be a monument of solitude, becoming instead a witness to a love both unexpected and eternal. Outside, snow fell thick, blanketing the endless prairie. Winter winds swirled, carrying flurries across the horizon. Yet Jacob and Emma's small ranch glowed like a lighthouse in the sea of white. In the wooden house, the hearth snapped and hissed. Jacob sat beside Emma, his rough hand holding hers. His weathered face bore the lines of time, but in his eyes shone a peace he had never known. He leaned close, whispering deep and steady, "I love you, Emma." She lifted her gaze, smiling softly through the veil of golden hair. Her hand brushed his sun-worn cheek, eyes brimming, sparkling. "And I love you, Jacob. This home, this life. It's what I found after all." They sat together, watching the snow fall, no longer feeling the cold. For in their small house, the fire of love was enough to warm the longest winter. The story closes leaving a simple truth in the Wild West. It is not money or bullets, but love and kindness that build the strongest shelter. Leave a comment and rate it from 0 to 10. Subscribe so you won't miss the next Wild West love story.